Bad, but that one in Lexington, it looked like a crystal palace.
Yeah, okay. Ready?
It was beautiful, but weird. You know, all kinds of trees fell down all over the place.
I'll open the city part of the joint meeting. It, open the meeting for the city commission and the special call joint meeting, Tuesday, August 2. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Bowles.
Here.
Commissioner Pruitt.
Here.
Commissioner Stady.
Here.
Commissioner Thomas.
Here.
Mayor Austin.
Here.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As Sheriff Hempel, I'll call to order our joint part of the meeting as well. And I want to welcome everybody. And at this moment, Tammy, roll call, please.
Commissioner Howell,
Here.
Commissioner Curlin,
Here.
Commissioner Weaver,
Here.
Commissioner Seitz,
Here.
Chairman Shannon.
Here.
Thanks for everybody being here. We appreciate it. And we will move directly to Brad Bickett, who is going to discuss information that was requested for Henderson Municipal Fire and Light. So, Brad, if you want to come up to the podium, there's a speaker up there, so, I mean, the microphones everywhere, we'll be able to hear you.
Sorry.
Do we have a clicker for the...
I'm sorry.
So, Mayor Austin, commissioners, utility commissioners, thank you all for getting together. I appreciate the interest, Commissioner Pruitt and Commissioner Staton, that you've had in our power supply planning. And this is something that I'm very close to on a regular basis, so I'm interested to talk to you all about it. And so in addition to our utility commissioners that we have present here, also have our Chief Financial Officer, Barbara Mall, and our General Counsel, Randall Redding and Sharon Farmer here. So we have Tammy Consular, who's our HR Director, is participating virtually. So in anticipation of having this discussion about power supply and what's the plan, where we're going, I thought it was really important. I started out with just a bullet point outline. I know presentations can kind of get a little bit, you know, monotonous, hard to follow. But I really wanted to point out some key points and to talk about some specific topics, just to give you all some background kind of on when the question is asked, what's the plan? It really needs to be said, what's the data that you're basing those decisions on. So I can tell you right now, real quickly, what our plan is, but without that background information, I don't feel like it'll be as meaningful to you, and it'll be better to ask. It'll lead to better questions from everybody if you've got that background information. So, and before we get into the presentation, I also want to make a comment and thank the power line workers that were out last night with the storms, getting our repairs made that were needed. Not just Henderson Power and Light line workers, but also the neighboring cooperatives and the investor-owned utilities. Hats off to those folks, because their job is dangerous, and it's a lot of times it's hard. It's very hard work. So just want to recognize them. I'm going to talk through some of the slides. We don't have to have it up, just in the interest of time. When we talk about the utility, the electric utility, I'll start off by introducing the agenda we'll go through. First of all, it's the strategic plan. Part of that strategic plan is what's our mission statement, what do we ultimately strive to do on a regular basis. Then I want to talk a little bit about our power costs, kind of show you the breakdown of what's included in those power costs. And I want to do a little bit of an overview of the power markets. They're a lot different today than they used to be. and they're gonna be a lot different in the future than they are today, so I wanna make that point. Then I've handed out to you all, and I don't know if I've got everybody, but if you didn't get the Integrated Resource Plan, it's a study we completed in September of 2021, I want everybody to have a copy of that. We're not gonna get into that, but you can take it with you, look through it, a lot of good information there. It might be some a little more technical than you want to see, but it's good information. And finally, we're gonna talk about next steps, and that's where we'll get to what the plan is and where we think we're going. Thank you, sir. So I just went through basically this slide, the agenda. What's the mission statement of Hempel? We strive to provide the highest quality service at the lowest possible rate. The way that we accomplish that mission is that we create and execute. You all may remember I mentioned this. We look at a 20-year future period. And then for the strategic plan for the company, for Hempel, there's 3 dimensions related to safety, finance, and performance. For power supply, and specifically for performance to accomplish the mission, we do what's called an integrated resource plan. And we refresh that periodically whenever we have a change or we need to evaluate what our next steps are going to be. That helps us determine what the best combination of generation resources are for the future and what level of reserve we need to execute that plan. Since we joined MISO, the market, we're required to have what's called an energy risk management policy. And it really just spells out for the organization what kind of practices are we going to have as we participate in the market. Depending on the type of entity you are, you might do things that are a little bit more, considered more financially risky than what a municipal like us would do. So our policy says that we actively seek to minimize the risks that are manageable, and this is important. We want rate and financial stability for our electric customers. Also, any power procurement activity, it should not unnecessarily expose Hempel to sudden price volatility or any unacceptable financial risk. So that's important. That's a policy that we have and follow in MISO, in the market. Now I want to explain this graph. Represents June of 2022, a little over a month ago. And you all may remember this graph, every bar represents one day in June. Between June 13th and June 17th, that's a week, Monday through Friday, we had unusually high temperatures, unusually high air conditioning load, and you'll see the dotted, line that goes across the graph here is the metered load on a daily basis. Bars represent power contracts that we put in place to hedge ourselves in the market. And naturally, well, I shouldn't say naturally, we target to hedge ourselves 100%. But times like this week here, we don't hedge for that because the more you hedge, the more it costs. So you have to find that balance. But this is a good visual representation of how the hedging works for people that maybe not clear on what we're doing. The gray is what we call a 7x24 block of energy, which means we buy a certain amount of megawatts every hour, every day. Now, a megawatt is 1,000 kilowatts. So if you are used to seeing kilowatt hours on a bill, kilowatt is 1,000 watts. A megawatt is simply 1,000 kilowatts. And the utility, we talk in megawatts. So you'll hear me say megawatts quite frequently. Also, if you use 1 megawatt over an hour, then that's a megawatt hour. So if you see megawatt hour, that's a unit of energy over time. The 5x16 blocks, just like it sounds, we have power we buy 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, and only for 16 hours a day. We call that the peak hours of the day. Also, we have what's called CPUP. It's the hydropower we get from Barclays from the TVA system. That's our hydroelectric. We schedule that during the week, specifically in the summertime in the afternoon when the air conditioning load is the highest. In the wintertime, we'll schedule it in the morning and the evening when the load rises for people that use electric for heating. any questions on this graph?
All right, when you exceed the load, it's costing us more, correct?
It's costing us market price,
Okay.
whatever we
Now,
buy.
do we save money when we're below the load?
We get a credit.
Okay.
So, for example, yeah, here we're buying this power in the market. Here we're selling this. So that's why if we conserve, customers conserve, every kilowatt hour that's not used, we actually get something back for it, which is good. It may or may not be as much as we pay for the hedging.
Right.
It just depends on the market.
We're
So,
saving something.
right, and that's what this table shows. Block purchases, 99.2%. You add in 4.2% of market purchases. You subtract 6.8% of market sales, and you add 3.4% of CEPA. You add those all up, and you get 100%. That's the mix. When we talk about market prices, there's an acronym here I should have spelled it out. It stands for Locational Marginal Price, LMP. All that is the hourly load price. There's two different markets that we work in, day ahead and real time. Day ahead is represented by the blue line, real time is represented by the red line. We buy all of our power for tomorrow, what we think we need every hour. During that operating day, however much we're wrong by, we true up in the real time market. This graph shows for June, the hourly prices. They fluctuate quite a bit. The real time is usually more volatile, so a little bit more than the day ahead. On June 15th, we saw extraordinarily high prices that peaked at $881 per megawatt hour. Our average cost of power fluctuates between $40 and $50 a megawatt hour, to give you a reference point. So this scale has been skewed quite a bit by that week I told you about where we saw the high temperatures. Talk about power costs. What are the parts, the factors of power costs? And for June, as an example, can't see all this number, but our power cost was about $2.7 million for the month. That comes out to $52.64 megawatt hours. And the transition revenue that's subject to refund was $4.19 per megawatt hour. So our net power cost with the revenue included was $48.45 per megawatt hour. The pie graph shows you how much of our power consists of block energy, which is the 67%, how much of it's market, which is 14%, capacity is 7%, CEPA is 2%, and transmission is 10%. So we talk about this plan, integrated resource plan, and again, you've got to do a lot of work just to get the inputs into this study. What's important is that knowing that the future, or what we're going to be doing, is not going to look like what we've done in the past. And there's three main points I want to hit on. One, federal regulation. It's affecting us in more than one way. Solar, wind, and battery technologies, and distributed generation. I found this graphic from Austin, Texas website. It's a good representation of what's changed and how markets work. In an older practice, you needed so much power for your town. You built the generation, or you contracted for the generation. You used transmission to get it to your customers, and then you charge a retail rate to pay for that system. The way it works today, and the way it works for us in MISO, is that various generation resources are able to participate in the market by selling their power in at cost. MISO is the market operator, the regional transmission organization that dispatches these resources. And they also control the cost to the load. So they're selling the power, MISO, and they're buying the generation, and they're managing the transmission system in between. So various regulatory bodies that we deal with that we didn't deal with in the past. Federal Energy Commission, they are ultimately the highest level for interstate electric transmission and pipelines. They also regulate MISO and that how the markets work and how the transmission system is accessed. North American Electric Reliability Corporation was basically delegated as the Electric Reliability Organization by FERC. You all remember, in 2003, there was a big blackout in the Northeast. 55 million people lost power. It got a lot of attention. The Energy Policy Act of 2005 said there's a lot of industry standards out there that need to be requirements because these utilities are not doing what they should do in certain cases. So that resulted in reliability requirements that any electric utility doing certain functions has to comply with. So we deal with that, and we're audited by this organization called CERC, which is the regional organization that verifies we're complying with those standards. And again, MISO is the market operator regional transmission organization that we are a part of today. So what happened to open up transmission systems and markets started with FERC Order 888 in 1996, said that the transmission system is not going to be controlled by one entity. It's going to be open access, and it's going to be available on a fair basis for those that need to use it. Utilities that own transmission are required to offer that service to entities that need it or want to access it. The electric reliability regulation I spoke about, how does it apply to this utility? Number one, we're a transmission owner. That means that we have facilities that operate over 100,000 volts. Specifically, we have 161 kV lines, 161,000 volt lines that connect us to our neighbors. Distribution provider means that we provide power from transmission to retail customers. And balancing authority means that we are responsible for managing our load and our generation within our area. Today, we're only a load balancing authority. We will soon expect to be a generation and load balancing authority. Finally, transmission planner is a function that we took on when the contracts were terminated with Big Rivers, and MISO takes on the vast majority of those requirements. What we are required to do is provide them with specific data that they ask us for our system alone. So we have MISO as a partner to comply with the transmission planner and some of the balancing authority requirements. So we're audited every 3 years. There's 33 standards and 106 requirements included in those standards. Last audit was in May of 2021. Had no findings of potential noncompliance, and we didn't have any areas of concern. This slide is just so that you see what's in what they call, the MISO calls this the interconnection queue. When folks want to add generation to the system, they have to enter this queue, and there's a study process. These pie graphs show you the makeup of those generation projects and what type they are. So the yellow, which is the largest piece of every one of these graphs, is solar. The next largest is the orange, which is hybrid. It's when you take solar or wind, you combine it with typically battery storage, but it can be any other type of energy storage. Green is wind, seeing a lot more wind, especially in the MISO central region, a little bit northwest of us. Then red is storage. Again, most of this is battery storage that's being seen to come on the system. There's a small amount of gas, natural gas generation. This is, again, what's in the queue today. Just as a snapshot of the generation that's expected to be online with these years, got this from the MISO website also. This left graph is just the megawatt, the size of the projects. The right side is the number of projects, and by the color, it's the type. So the solar is the vast majority of the projects that are coming. So we look at the market. There's two pieces to it. There's supply and there's demand. We, in the past, didn't worry as much about demand as we do today. It was always just supply whatever you need to meet the needs of the customers. For supply side changes, we're seeing a different capacity mix into the future. Not just the changing of mix, but and especially in our area, there's less of the capacity as the coal plants retire, so that's making the capacity cost higher if you go out into the market. Natural gas and energy prices have trended higher over the past year. You all have seen that. On the demand side, what we know is that electrification is generally going to increase. There is more adoption of electric heating as air source heat pumps become more affordable and more common. Distributed generation is also going to increase. That technology cost has come down. It's becoming more and more affordable for people to produce their own generation. Also, on the demand side, we should always try to use less power. Going forward, it just makes sense. The more efficient we can be with the use of our energy, the less usage of the entire system that we have to buy. And it makes more room for the electrification of, I didn't mention this, but transportation too. So any efficiency measures are going to be included going forward. Some will be naturally adopted because if you go to the store, buy yourself some of the lighting today, generally the LED lighting technology, which is the best, most efficient, is going to be also the lowest cost. So we expect it'll continue. So what has the utility done recently on demand side? First, we converted all the street lights to LED. That began in 2017, was completed at the end of last year. Completed an energy audit in 2019 to look at what conservation measures we could do, what makes sense, what's got the best payback. We found that LED lighting was by far the best payback on reducing usage and even improving the quality of the lighting in most cases. So it was really, it just makes sense. We also pursued the transition to LED lighting for all city facilities. Buzzy, we worked together on that, and also with the Henderson Housing Authority, and Bobby Jarrett worked with her, and that was all beneficial to the organization, utility, and partnering organizations. We also started LED incentive program at the beginning of 2020 for customers. That has, we see some participation in that. I'd like to see a little bit more, but we're continuing that program. We also trying to promote energy conservation for all our customers with we did the distribution of conservation kits. Very well received from what we saw. We had good participation, got a lot of good feedback, and look forward to maybe doing some other programs like that, more outreach. I think outreach is key. The more education we can do, and this served as education and a benefit, right? People will have to lower their usage, but they also kind of learned a little bit about what was available out there and what, in some cases, when I talked to the customers, just understanding that Henderson Power and Light was the electric provider. A lot of them, don't think about that. So also we've got 394 kilowatts of distributed solar generation on the system now, and that was since a new distributed generation policy was adopted in 2020. I'll also let you know that we've got almost that much in our queue. So we have an application process. Customers can come and they have to go through get the permit, have it inspected and everything. But we've got a lot of solar projects that are in the works and about to be connected. So on the supply side, you all know we transitioned to the MISO power market. We secured through a competitive process hedging contracts. We also did a RFP and acquired a power purchase agreement for solar, 50 megawatts of solar, signed in June of 2020. That solar power is supposed to be online mid-2024. That is delayed. It's in the MISO interconnection process that I just described. They have so many projects and they have a shortage of transmission planners. They're not able to get these projects moved forward as they would like. But we're going to continue communicating, working with the developer, to see that project go forward. Finally, the integrated resource plan that I passed out to you all was completed last fall in September in order to help us get a good picture of what our lowest cost options look like going forward. So I want to talk about that plan just a little bit. Again, hand it out to you, take it and look at it and let us know if there's anything you want to talk about. But I'm going to hit the highlights. The study period was looked at to begin in 2024 with what we know is going to be in place or what we expect to be in place. That includes energy capacity block contracts, the local solar that I just told you about, and our SEPA, which is our hydroelectric. What's the process that's involved? We forecast our load out 20 years, and we look at the energy that we need on a monthly basis, and we also look at what our peak demand requirement's going to be for both summer and winter in that forecast. Then we look at resource alternatives. There's a lot of work that goes into that. For this study, we ended up with 12 resource stacks, and we created different scenarios for the future. I'll talk a little bit more about those, but there were 4 different scenarios that we looked at into the future. And then we model each one of those portfolios to look at what's the cost to serve our load in each one. Finally, the way we evaluate the data, we look at lowest net present value cost. We look at all the costs over 20 years, bring that to a net present value. We look at the capital requirement that's involved, with what borrowing we would have to do and how much we would have to start out investing. Carbon emissions is a risk component. The way I describe that is we all know that accelerated climate change is a result of greenhouse gases. We know that emission of carbon into the atmosphere is not something that should continue long term. How we transition, to a future where we're not emitting as much carbon is still yet to be determined. But we have to look at that as a factor when we do our evaluation. Also, resiliency is, and that's a factor. What I would describe as less risk. It's closer. It's considered better when you have a local resource versus buying it from somewhere far away and having to transport that power or put that power through the transmission system. Fuel diversity and cost volatility. So one graph you see in the IRP that I'll point to is the resource portfolios. I talked a little bit about this when I explained kind of our load on an hourly basis and annual basis. The base load resources are what you're going to use most of all the time, say 85%. Then you'll have what's called the intermediate resources, finally peaking resources, and reserves. Reserves are really there for those times whenever you don't have, for those times that you would not expect to exceed your peak, and you would rely on the reserves. I want to comment that we are focusing on technology that's commercially viable and environmentally sustainable. And as an example is the quick start natural gas generation, solar, wind, energy storage, and third-party power purchase agreements. So I mentioned we put together 12 resource stacks as well. I'll refer to them as they're basically generation resource plans. Each one of those will have our current SEPA power, our solar power purchase agreement, which is this light blue bar. This solar that is seen is additional solar to what we've already contracted. The red block is BESS, which is battery energy storage. So this gray it's using the name Wärtsilä. They are an OEM that makes the reciprocating engines that we're looking at for natural gas. And then we looked at nuclear. You might say, well, is nuclear even an option? Probably way down the road, it might be an option. There's not an opportunity for us to have a nuclear plant today. However, we could enter into an agreement, a power purchase agreement with a nuclear facility somewhere in the country, and we looked at what that cost would be like. So whenever the consultant looked at these resources and looked at these different scenarios. They did what's called an hourly dispatch model. And so, for example, you have the 7 by 24 block, and you have, in this scenario on the left, you have market purchases with our SEPA power laid in on the peak hours. On the right, you have the 7 by 24 block with the RICE. RICE stands for Reciprocating Internal Combustion Engine. The RICE unit's used to fill in where you would normally buy and market. Then you have your SEPA, and finally, you have the market purchases on the top. So that's just an example of how that dispatch study was done. So let's talk about the scenarios a little bit. We looked at 4. Business as usual. Basically, it's self-explanatory. We assume things are going to stay the way they are into the future. High technology, that's adoption of more electrified transportation, and more renewables, more penetration of renewables, that kind of thing. Carbon reduction is basically looking to be, I think it's carbon neutral by a certain date in the future. And carbon displacement is complete removal of carbon emissions in the transportation sector, I think, and in the energy sector. What we found is that these 2 scenarios, 3 and 4, when you looked at the net present value over time, they really just, all the resources performed pretty much the same. It was just everything got more expensive. So let's look at the net present value for the base case. Each bar has a number that represents its rank as being lowest cost. Number 1 would be resource option or resource plan. Number 6, which is having utility solar only, the 50 megawatts, and nothing else. Mainly saying you're going to be basically in the market. The high technology, again, these are ranked. Number 1, in terms of, this is only the net present value cost, and then the legend you'll see in the millions of dollars. And the business as usual is represented as a dotted line across the bar graph. As you would expect, the 11 and 12, which are the 2 that included a nuclear resource power purchase agreement, become more attractive or better as you go into a lower carbon future. Cost of emitting carbon goes up in this type of a scenario into the future. And then scoring, I mentioned earlier the evaluation criteria here on the left to assign a ranking. And finally, a portfolio is scored, ultimately looking at resource plans number 9 and 10. 9 and 10 include the natural gas fueled peaker plant, distributed generation solar, which would be in addition to what we already have contracted, some battery storage in number 10, and a 15 megawatt contracted block like we buy today, and then 15 megawatt block in number 9 too. So what are our next steps? We're going to continue to buy the block energy as we've done and hedge ourselves against any volatility in the market. And we're also going to have to buy capacity where we're short in the same manner. MISO requires us to have capacity. You can't just buy energy. You have to have the capacity to meet what you think will be your peak demand. You have to show your work. How do you forecast what your peak is going to be? Ours is August. It's 105 megawatts. We have to have capacity to meet that, plus a certain reserve percentage, which is calculated by MISO, about 15%. We're going to also include solar and working with the developer, like I mentioned, through the interconnection delays and these cost impacts that are being seen. There could be some benefit to the renewable legislation that would help to fund renewables. We monitor that pretty closely. We're going to look at other opportunities where distributed generation might make sense. One is the landfill site, which is being closed. We looked at that. Could be a good place to put some storage. Could be storage there also, mainly solar panels.
They can be done in a way that they are ballasted, which means you don't go into the cap to put your footers in place. So we're looking at that as a potential resource. And finally, we are pursuing a local peaking plant. And the nominal output that we're looking for is 36 megawatts. The RFP says we're looking for between 30 and 40 megawatts. Again, our peak that we anticipate for August is 105. That gives you kind of an idea of how much of our load could be served by the peaking plant. When I talked to our commission about a peaking plant and, you know, looking at what we need to do in terms of borrowing and natural gas prices and how does that look, right? So it was suggested, well, let's look at May. Take what happened in May and run the numbers as if we had this peaker plant. And we look at two different technologies. CT means combustion turbine. This would be a natural gas generator that is it's like a jet engine on a platform. It's an aeroderivative, and it's a little less efficient than the RICE, which is the reciprocating internal combustion engine. So we put this data together, and what we're assuming here is that in a month that looked just like May of 2022, we had this 30 megawatt base block that we've got through 2029. And in one scenario, that's all we had, and we were in the market. Our cost to serve customers would have been almost $3.3 million at a rate of about $73.70 per megawatt hour. If we had the RICE unit, the 36 megawatts, with that same block and the rest of the market, our cost of power would have been offset by the margin that would have been made by running that unit in the market, about $500,000. And it would have offset the power cost, bringing it down to $2.7 million, or $61 a megawatt hour. And finally, the combustion turbine would have run less or resulted in less revenue in market, bringing the power cost to about $3 million. The takeaway here is that, and I mentioned, the combustion turbine you can install for less capital. It's more expensive to install the RICE units, but you're getting a more efficient unit that over time is going to result in more revenue in the market. There's a term that's used when you put generation into a dispatch mode. It's called capacity factor. It means how much is it running? How much is it going to run? For example, solar is about 25%, meaning if you put solar panels out there, they're going to produce power that is, if you look at a R50 megawatt facility, over the year, took 50 megawatts times 24 hours times 365 days, you come up with a megawatt hour number. We're going to make about 25% of that because there's only about 5 or 6 hours during the day where they'll produce power. In this scenario, the RICE unit ran 81% capacity factor, which you'd say, well, that's surprising because natural gas is higher. Well, the important thing to know here is as long as you've got an efficient unit, even if gas prices go up, you're competitive. So the units are being dispatched. Whatever the difference is between the market and what it costs you to run the generator is revenue that will be received from MISO. Any questions on that? That's an important slide because it kind of shows what the peaking plant could do. Now, I wouldn't say, the consultant estimates based on market projections that our capacity factor for this power plant we're looking at is going to be 20%, just so you know. So not 81%, but at 20% as it's projected, that margin, the revenue would be about $136,000, if my memory is correct, on how much it would bring. So, yeah, anyway, if there's any questions on this slide.
I'm assuming that the bonding costs are not included in this cost here.
Correct.
So this would assume
Variable cost.
there were no additional, yeah, so this is variable cost.
Strictly variable cost, good question, because, you know, when I talked with Barbara a lot about, you know, about this and the cost and what it would look like if we did bonding, and it's like, you know, as I mentioned in our last meeting, when we entered into the MISO capacity market, we got in contracts because there was extra capacity. For reference, we were paying, and it was a little over $10 million a year for Station 2, just capital, O&M. We got into the MISO, we were getting that same amount of capacity for a little over $2 million, so significantly less. Price of capacity in MISO today is a little over $7 million for us a year if we were to do that. So that bonding the debt service, would be paying for capacity that we would get in MISO. We'd get 36 megawatts of capacity credit that we don't have to buy in the market. So that's a separate evaluation, looking at the justification of the cost.
And if we were, and the only other question I've got so far is, if we were to invest in the rice unit, which is, as you said, more efficient than the other one, correct?
Mhm.
Would there be an incentive for us to run that as much as we could to sell out the excess power if we were competitive?
So the interesting thing about it is, and, thinking about it, having worked at a coal plant, I worked at Seabury, to imagine trying to dispatch this thing correctly, to me, a little bit stressful. I think, oh, how do you do that? The nice thing about it is that MISO will dispatch the unit for us. So we can set this up just where they send signals to the plant, and anytime the price of market power exceeds our cost to run, they would run the unit.
Oh, okay.
And so that would almost be something, it really is how they model this as well.
Yeah.
So the nice, these rice units can ramp from being off to full load in 3 minutes. Real impressive. So,
Go way back for a second. All right, you said we were averaging $40 to $50
dollars per megawatt hour.
megawatt, okay.
Mhm.
And we were paying $800 for the peak.
No, that's what the price went to in the market.
We weren't paying.
No, we were hedged.
Okay,
We were hedged.
good.
We did incur,
I was gonna say this too right now.
we did incur some costs it's called congestion costs, and it's whenever you have too much power on the system, there's the price of power, which is tied, MISO dispatches generation in order of least cost to highest cost, so that they need more, they bring it on. But there's also congestion, which hit us for that hottest day in June, quite significant. And having a local plant would help to mitigate congestion costs. So that's kind of another benefit to having a local plant. Not to mention that there's a benefit to having what they call ancillary services. I'm not going to get into the detail too much, but it's reactive power support. Reactive power is produced by generators that have the ability to, it's the power used to turn motors and energize transformers, basically. And that's not as easily provided by renewables. Well, by solar, can be by wind turbines, but so there's benefits that we've looked at in addition to just selling the energy in MISO.
You said, MISO there's some extra cost because we went over capacity in that peak area. Is that what you was talking about? Is that gonna be passed on to customers?
So the congestion, piece of it that I just mentioned,
Right.
that is, it goes in as market costs. So there's some costs that come with the purchase of power that we pay, and it's MISO administrative costs, congestion, and that goes to the power cost adjustment included. So when we look at the power costs, we include any and all costs, any and all credits, and then whatever that, ends up being.
So since everybody probably went over that peak in time, so there's gonna be a cost distributed between people, different companies, and so, is that what you're saying?
So the congestion specifically for that time, now the power cost went up very high, and everyone shared in that.
Right.
The congestion is more locational specific, and it has to do with the fact that there's not enough transmission in certain areas, maybe there's plenty in others. So if you've got enough transmission, there's not enough, the system's not being overloaded, then you're not gonna see any congestion. But if you're in an area where there's too much power trying to serve over too few wires, that congestion piece starts to go up.
So there's gonna be some that's gonna feel that, and here with us, right?
There's gonna be,
That price is gonna be put in.
yes, it's already come through.
Right.
For I think the July bill saw that, that's for that day. And, there's some federal regulation too on separation between like what the transmission system's doing, what the market's doing. So I've tried to find out what the exact cause of that congestion was, and I wasn't able to get an answer. But there was a big transmission line that was out from the December 2021 tornadoes that went south of us that didn't get put in until the end of June. Suspect that could have contributed to that congestion piece.
Brett, just curiosity's sake, and if you don't have the answer, it's okay, but, just trying to think in my head how this would work. So we set a price as break-even price, so to speak, and as long as they're paying more than our break-even price, then MISO can run the plant.
That's right.
So how often do we calculate the break-even price based on the variance of inputs that come in? Is that daily?
Real
or-
time. In 2019, I went to Alexandria, Louisiana, where they have these units actually running, and the same consultant that we're using to help us through this process in terms of market participation was putting together those variable costs for MISO. But they were looking at spot natural gas price, and that was being sent to MISO real
Okay.
time. I think probably an hourly basis.
Okay.
And sometimes there will be a need, there is a need that MISO might want to run the units, and it may not be economic for us. In that case, they have what's called a make-whole payment, so they will actually pay, as the owner, they'll pay you for that, keep you from having to be out in costs.
So we don't, I'm assuming we won't have any priority risk though? Is that right? I mean, if we need those for our power, MISO can't come in and run it for their power over, a priority over ours, is that correct?
Right, if we need power, the market works to dispatch the power. In other words, if we have a need for the units, the price will signal, will cause the units to be economic.
Okay.
Does that make
It is.
Okay. Because you have physical characteristics of the grid and financial market
Sure.
construct.
Sure.
And they do it pretty well to help, better than other regions in the country you might hear about so far. Now this graph, if there's not anything else that we take away from this presentation, this is a very important illustration. What I try to do here is to show the approximate monthly cost of power over time, being the first bar, pre-2019, this was with Station 2, when we did our first integrated resource plan and made the decision to terminate contracts, join the market. Between 2019 and 2021, we had a lower cost of power. And then when we secured new, quote-unquote, peaking block energy, we saw a little bit of a higher price for that power, drove our cost, primarily the energy piece, which is the gray section. So we're seeing a little bit higher price of power today and in 2024. This higher price in the 2024 and after, it is projected. Know that I nor anyone else can predict the future, but based on what is being projected today, we believe that the energy prices are going to be higher, driven by the higher cost of the fuel, natural gas being one, coal also, and capacity, which is the blue piece. You remember I said we had a higher cost of capacity before we terminated contracts. We got a good deal for a period of time. This capacity is going to be some number higher in the future, higher than what we have today, and that's one of the key points to note. It doesn't matter if we build the capacity or we go out and we buy it. We are looking for folks that have capacity that we could actually do another RFP and to possibly contract for something beyond 2024. But today we believe that the cost is going to be higher than what we have today. And I do want to for sure stop if there's any questions on this slide.
So this is if we do nothing?
No, this is if we do our least cost option.
I mean, if we don't build anything, if we're still purchasing similar to how we're purchasing today, these are going to be new contract prices, is that what you're?
So,
Either way,
I was gonna say, either way,
right?
I'm using approximate energy prices, and, I've got actually here, let me see. The gray bar, I don't have it on a dollar. So we're at about $40 just for our energy, $2 million a month. This is based on 50,000 megawatt hours a month. Looking at that going to 55. And let me explain another thing, try to make this as easy to straightforward. When you hear about natural gas prices, you hear about that priced in a decatherm, which is 1 million BTU, all right? I want to say natural gas right now is about $8. I think it actually came down a little bit. For that month of May, we used $8 a decatherm gas. The efficiency of a unit is explained by what's called a heat rate. It's converting BTU to kilowatt hour. We expect the reciprocating engine plant heat rate would be about 8.8. So you multiply 8.8 times 8, $65 for your energy off the plant. And any revenue that is received is going to help to offset that cost. But with unless natural gas prices go back down to $4 a decatherm, the energy cost is going to be higher in the future than it is today. And the reason I reference natural gas is because it is the marginal cost of power in the market right now. It used to be coal, natural gas is it. The capacity, truly, if you look at what the capacity, the cost is, unless somebody's got it out there and doesn't need it, it's going to cost more than what we're paying. So I'm putting this out there as just I'm kind of using just some approximate numbers, but they're based on what we're seeing, we think we'll see in the future.
How does that translate to rates? So you're looking at pre-2019 being at 2.7,
Right.
going to 3.6, is a 33% increase.
So look at the bottom here.
Uh-huh.
We were at about $53 a megawatt hour pre-2019. That's equivalent of 5.3 cents per kilowatt hour on a kilowatt hour basis. We're in the approximately, like I said, between 4 and 5 cents on our power cost today. This will be 7.1 cents at $71.60 per megawatt hour, and that's a net value, like Commissioner Pruitt, you had mentioned. Well, we take the credits that we receive, we take the cost. This would represent that net cost of power, taking into account. Now, it can always come out better than we expect. Could come out worse, but I tried to get that nominal price for each one of these pieces of our power costs, and that's what's represented here.
So if this happens exactly this way, that means that in 2024, you would be coming and seeking $1 per, I mean, does it translate to dollar for dollar? So if we see a 33% increase here, is the utility going to need a 33% increase?
Over time, I mean,
To cover it.
and it's gonna start in 2023, yeah. We're planning to do a cost service study in January 2023. I've talked to Barbara about bringing that sooner, because we need to know what the peaker plant, our bids look like, to know if we're gonna proceed with the peaker plant, roll that all in, so that we've got good data. We'll know that in September. We'll open bids, and the sooner that we can understand how accurate these numbers look, but like I said, the cost service study will help give us a better understanding.
Buzzy, I'm getting old. Did we come up with $50 million for that one peaker? What was it? How many megawatts it was? 50 million?
Which plant? Station 2,
Yeah.
76 million
Okay.
and 72, and it was, 350 megawatts, wasn't it, Brad? 175.
Correct.
Okay.
The net output was 315, I believe. That's because the plant uses some of its own power, and you get a net output. Speaking of that, I do have some numbers that and again, we haven't opened any bids for the plant, but we've been told that about $1,600 per kilowatt or $1.6 million per megawatt is about what we should expect to see for a plant. So if we're looking at a 36 megawatt plant, that would be $57,600,000.
And then I'm not gonna talk much more, that we can have more discussion, but I do wanna mention that, we do see a need to be prepared for bonding for that. I think that that's really the best way to go forward, understanding what we do about the market. I would also wanna mention that in seeking the bonds, we have this solar project that we expect to have some, cost to interconnect. And, that's gonna be approximately $2 million. And, we also have a ash pond in Seabury that we're working with Big Rivers to close. You all may or may not know, but the EPA has gotten a little bit more stringent on their rule for CCR, it's coal combustion residual. We thought we could close it in place at one time, and it's looking now more like we're gonna have to remove that material. So that cost, is gonna go up. It's up from the previous budget figure that we had, so we estimated about $5 million for our piece, our share. So what I would ask for, the support would be, and from the utility commission to the city, I think it'd be best if we looked at the general obligation bonding, would be $66 million in total to cover those three things.
Well, this is a question for you, and it could be for the utility. Is this the same scenario with bonding for HMP&L that would be for HWU, where we by approving a bond issue, it opens up a window of maybe about a year where you can issue a bond in a year's time? Is that right?
Well, it depends what approach Temple wants to take. The other thing that was discussed in their board meeting last night is their rating will depend on the rate of the bond. But a lot of this probably, I see them very similar to HWU.
Because we've had a situation, and you're aware, where interest rates over the past month have dropped about 20%. And, we've got a little bit of break before the Fed meets again. Highly anticipated rates will probably go back up. And so we're still in a favorable position to try to acquire low interest rates on bond issues. And that's probably not going to last very much longer. Nobody really knows, but I think the most risk is on the upside, especially when you're talking about a $66 million bond issue. So I feel like time is of the essence, so to speak. If we are going to move forward, we could be saving ourselves millions of dollars if we do so in the not too distant future versus maybe waiting a year on this. What would you think on that comment? Curious.
I agree. It's still, a lot of it's gonna also come back to how stable and how solid we are
Yes.
as the ratings too.
Sure.
So there's a big percent, a lot of basis points in that part too.
A lot of things to consider.
What you said, yes, and that's true. And the rating company's gonna look at is, do you have the ability, are you gonna have the income?
Yeah.
Have the rates that we need to be stable and reliable.
How long will it take to pay that back?
We,
20 years.
I think that
20 years is what we looked at in terms of looking at the debt service.
So is it your recommendation that, based on everything that you've seen, that we should be moving toward the 36 peaker along with some solar to subsidize the solar that we're already getting, and then backfill with open market purchases to
Yes.
meet our demand? Is that, because that's very similar to the plan that was discussed a few years ago as well.
Yes, and we also have a company right now trying to look into a storage value for us. If it makes sense for us to adopt some storage, we're gonna look at that also. But it's not, storage is not to the scale we need to not do this peaker plant today.
We are kind of in a similar situation that the commission was in several years ago with the water department, where we know we're going to have a big need, and we certainly don't want to end up at a spot where we get here 3 or 4 years down the road and dump it on our customers all at one time. And so it may be of benefit to us to put in a series of rate increases over a period of time to get us to where we're gonna end up having to be.
I think that's where it's gonna have to go. I think that's how it's gonna have to be done. And it's gonna be done like that all over the country. Evansville, Owensboro, Paducah, Mansville, doesn't make any difference where you go, they're facing the very same situation, and they are trying to figure out right now how to manage this. That's gonna be the solution. Now, on the other side, if we can get our customers to do more, to operate their homes more efficiently, and our businesses to operate their homes more efficiently, if we can get our customers, and when they leave from work in the morning, to turn their thermostat from 70 to 75, and then turn it back down to 72 in the evenings, and if we can get our customers to use LEDs all the way through everything that's in their home, then it's gonna offset some of their costs, you know, but people hadn't been eager to make small changes within their own home in order to save on their cost and also on the power usage. And I think that's a big key. That's a partnership thing with all of this, is we have to have a campaign for efficiency in homes and businesses.
So if we went this route, all right, we're projecting $71 in 2024. What will we project the cost to be in 2024 with this route?
Well, again, looking at that particular graph, it's looking at what we expect to pay for the energy as a approximate number, capacity, whether we go out and build a plant or we buy that capacity from somebody else. The benefit of the plant is that we would get revenue from the market to potentially lower that cost at times where we see volatility. If you look at other places where they've experienced these capacity shortages, which MISO is broadcasting that we are starting to see here, having a resource like this is very valuable to these folks. When you have so to answer your question, whether we have the peaker or not, that 7-cent number is what I expect when you take into account the borrowing cost, debt service, plus the fuel to run the generator, file our contracts. That's just an approximate number that we need to be cognizant of, that it's going to be about that. We don't know, how much dispatch of these units will have to bring that down.
What did we look at in May? What was that number? You did a real example on that.
It was 3.3 to 2.7.
It was a $500,000 difference less having the peaker plant, because that represented the revenue that could have been received due to the difference between market and operating variable costs of the plant.
That was just a normal month, right? No peaks.
It was a normal month, but it was a little more volatile in the market because of the gas prices, and it does bring volatility. You can say, well, you're using a natural gas fueled resource, but when there's other resources being dispatched, it creates volatility in the market. So
We would actually want peaks if we would sell it off.
within 36 megawatts, and what we were hedged. And just like back to your question about that day in June, and my blood pressure went up very quickly seeing those prices. First thing I did is went and looked to see how much we were hedged for, and we were completely hedged against that $800 spike. So I don't think we were really long, but if we had any extra, we would receive that same high price. Buzz, you had a question?
You mentioned earlier, battery storage. is key to a lot of the discussions today regarding solar. How are you progressing with studying the technologies that are out there today?
So we have one interested company that I've tasked with telling us how we can get some value out of storage, because there's different value streams. One of the most common is that the battery is used for what's called energy arbitrage, meaning that you're charging the battery at a low market price and you're discharging it into a high market price. There's another value stream where you put a battery in a substation where you are at your transformer capacity. In other words, you're going to have to put money into that substation. You can put a battery there to take that demand off the system during a peak time. So that and then there's also a capacity benefit. If a battery is capable of discharging over a 4-hour period, MISO will give capacity credit to a battery. So it's more complex to evaluate storage in a market in terms of what revenue could be received, but we're looking at it. And we've got more than one consultant that's looking at how we might be able to benefit from it right now.
Is technology there, or is it evolving?
It's there, but the price is still higher than $71. It shakes out to about $150 a megawatt hour right now. But if you go to somewhere else like Texas, where they've got prices at times when they have brownouts, that these batteries pay for themselves in a matter of days.
That leads into a question I had. So if it seems like logic would say that we would, but I don't know the power market enough. If we have our own plant, does that reduce our likelihood of future brownouts? Does it improve reliability?
Absolutely.
You know,
That's resiliency.
Yeah.
And that's one of the factors that we looked at. And that, it's a great point, because we're entirely dependent on the transmission wires that connect us to our neighbors today for all the power our customers use. And, you know, as an engineer, that gives me a little bit of pause, because I want to have something that's more close to our load, our customers. And that's back to the physics of the system. So when that generating plant produces power, even though we're selling it into a market, it's actually being consumed by our customers, to the extent that our customers are using at least 36 megawatts, and they always do. Our minimum is down around 50, 55.
And then how many megawatts are you thinking that we would have in 2024 on solar?
Right now, we have the community energy, which has been acquired by AES, and that has been what looks like to be a good thing. They're a larger company, at 50 megawatts. Still think it can be in place by June 1 of 2024. That would serve about 115,000 megawatt hours a year. It's about 20% of our total energy requirement. Again, we're seeing this delay, and we're looking at ways to, get that, resolve those interconnection study delays that we've got. But as of right now, we're targeting June 1, 2024.
Are we in a position where we might suggest to homeowners to install solar?
I think we should always encourage folks that can to install solar, and we want to allow, not only allow that, but that's our distribution rate, distributed generation rate for each customer class makes the utility indifferent. In other words, we are recovering all the fixed costs for maintaining that service to that customer through the monthly charge, and then the variable piece, the kilowatt hour piece, reflects actually what our cost of power delivered is. So we're indifferent, and I think that that's the way to go, because a customer should be able to produce power if they want to, but we want to avoid subsidizing those folks from the people that don't have the ability to generate solar. So I think that the rate we have in place is good. We've got some work to do, I think, for the standard rates to try to look more like that, and as far as are we recovering our costs appropriately. But I don't think and I also say that
if we ask where we want our power produced, I think if we're producing it from the customers, I think that's a great thing. So I think that it's good. I just think we should incentivize.
Understood.
Yep.
And it's also oftentimes a very complex financial decision to make, so tax credits and the cost, liability of the people who are doing it, there's just a lot. I don't know what we could do as a utility to maybe help inform people or make a decision, whether to help them have a better sound basis to make the decision. That's a good question.
Do we have anything in place right now that you feel like, and this is just, again, me being ignorant, disincentivizes people from installing solar? In terms of the, rate structure or procedures or any hurdles that they might have or anything like that?
I don't know of anything. I think that our process works pretty well in terms of just that administrative piece, and I think that the rate makes sense. And then, of course, any federal tax credits a benefit to a customer that would want to do it. But, no, I don't know of anything that is prohibiting or.
And going back to that 7 cents, 2024. Get that horse, but now, 28, if we did this, are we gonna level off of that, or are we still looking at increased costs down the road?
You know what? Former general manager said something that really rang true to me. I've repeated several times, and, because I went to him and said, here's a forecast, and, you know, that's all great. You know, and nothing against you, but, you know, every forecast is wrong, and the question is by how much. So that number that's out there for that 2024 is just based upon, you know, kind of what we're seeing today and what the industry thinks is kind of is an expectation for the future. But beyond that, you know, there's so many factors that influence energy prices. And just look, for example, once the United States started exporting liquefied natural gas to Europe, that's what really drove the price of natural gas up in this country. And whenever that terminal went offline 3 months ago, natural gas prices went down 30%. So that influences those numbers. And how many other utilities are out there building capacity because of these price signals? That also influences the capacity cost. So I really don't have a good answer for you, Rodney, but you know, projection.
I don't know how the rest of the city commission feels, but I know how I feel. If what I'm seeing your numbers looking like are correct, in the short term, it looks like once we get 2 or 3 years down the road, the costs of building a plant, bonding associated, benefits of it, to our end users are going to be about the same as if we do not build anything. Is that accurate?
It
Am I
is.
drawing that correctly out of it?
It is, but it's based on an assumption that, you know, right. You're taking on a little, here's the way I would describe or characterize it. It's more risky to do the contract method than it is to build your own plant.
In my mind, I totally agree with that. I think there's so many pluses to being a power producer, both in the intermediate and long term, that we might give up just a little bit in the very short term, but the benefits totally outweigh that. And what do you all need from us? What can we do at the city commission level to help you get to that point to where we can pull the trigger on this?
I think the first step would be to get the process for the bonding that I mentioned. And I think doing the general obligation bonds is the best way to go from what I understand today. The other thing I was going to mention this, and I think now's a good time as any. The owner's engineer that's working on this project reached out to a utility in Rochester, Minnesota, that has a peaking plant just like the one that we're soliciting bids for, and they have invited folks, if there's interest in a tour. That would be, we've got a window of days between August 23rd and August 26th. if anyone's interested to do that trip, I'd be happy to go. I've been to one plant like this before, like I said, it was a few years ago, but I know a lot more now than I did then, so I have some better questions for the folks. So opening that up to anyone that would be interested to make that trip, it's about a 10-hour drive, so I think it might need a flight. If there's a, and I haven't looked to see.
It depends on if there's a flight.
I need to look to see what the arrangements would be, but I wanted to extend that invitation to any of you all that are interested.
We bond on that.
Brad, if you're gonna take a small group up there, would you keep me in the loop, because I sure would like to go.
I will, I'll do that. So, yeah, please, just let me know if that's something that you're interested in between those days, and it'll be a overnight, it'll either be, one of the 2 days, it'll be 2 days between 8/23 and 8/26, whatever the consensus might be. And the folks there at that utility have said that they'll, if it's not running, they're gonna start one up for us, just so we can see it run. But other than that, Commissioner, you know, I think it's really, appreciate, you know, its support and accommodation for the financing that we think that we'll need.
I'm particularly interested in you all coming back with us, as your numbers kind of sharpen, and hopefully they sharpen pretty quickly. And I don't mean sharpen, I don't mean lessen, I mean get more exact.
Right.
As they sharpen, you all coming back to us to have some rate discussions. Because I know that I think the hardest thing that the end customers have had to endure over the past decade had to do whenever there was I believe a 22% increase that happened. And I certainly don't want to get on down the road into a situation where we have to raise rates by that much in any one given year. So if there's anything that we can do to kind of plan that out a little better so that we're not hitting everybody so hard all at once, I would be interested in hearing what you all have to say on that.
Brad, go ahead, you answer.
Do our rates already adjust at all for this power charge?
So we have a power cost adjustment, which includes the cost of the block energy. It includes the market costs that we pay. It also includes market revenue that's received for any block energy that's scheduled and not used by the customer. So it also includes transmission revenue, not subject to refund.
That now includes it with refund.
Right now it does, but, and any micro fees, administrative fees are included in there. So yes, we want that power cost adjustment to be zero, but it will fluctuate depending on.
Go ahead, the rates are already set right now, so I'm just curious as to what exactly we need to adjust. What will we need to adjust?
So that's a good question, because the discussion about the capacity cost of debt service might be needed. And then, maybe resetting that to zero when we know what the base should be, so that we don't get into a situation where the power cost adjustment is running, you know, positive all the time.
Brad, I'm gonna tell you, this is probably one of the best Temple meetings I've ever attended. I mean, just from the surface, you laid it out, you didn't try to slick us, you came straight with it. I felt like this was an honest presentation. First one I've been, I'm truthful. And everybody knows, it's no secret, I can judge a person, and I'm a good judge of character. You gave us what we needed to know. Like you said, we need to know what we're gonna hit these customers with, because when we did the 22 rate increase, that was bad. And we need to know what we're looking at down the road for these customers that come to. And on that line, maybe you'll know, maybe not. The $7 million we got set aside, we get a favorable rating. What is your plan, how that's gonna be distributed back to the customer?
So there was a little bit of I had to ask for a correction in the paper, because it was misunderstood. As we've credited customers that transmission revenue, we've taken money from our operating reserves and put it aside. So that money, $7 million, was credited to customers over about 3 years. Since we started getting it in February 1 of 2019, we credited that through the power cost adjustment that entire time. So we took our operating reserves and we set that aside, thinking we were gonna get a ruling sooner than later, and we've not gotten one. So now that's the reason why we asked for that to stop happening, because we're gonna run out of unrestricted reserves to set aside. So of the $23.5 million of reserves we have, 7 of that is currently held as restricted for the transmission revenue. So if we have to give it back, got it. But it's gonna make our operating reserves far below our target, if that's the case.
Well, I'm glad you clarified that, okay? Second thing, once you make your transition, your complete transition into the new building, when you sell the property down here, what's the plans for the revenue that the price for?
So
What's that plan?
we used about so far we've used about $2.5 million to buy the land where we've moved to, and we've had soil issues, we've had to do stabilization at the site. We're currently trying to put in some drainage to get the subsurface water out so we can put our footers in to build the service center. So the whole process of rebuilding our campus, it started out rebuilding where we're at today. Once we said we'll move, the idea, the thinking was, we'll receive revenue from the sale of the property where we're at. That will help us offset the cost of our move, which is going to be about the same as what we expect based on what the property's worth. Thank you for your comments, Mr. Pruitt. I really appreciate it.
Well, I think we got a lot to deal with, because, like you said, we're looking at a big jump real quick to 24, and there's gonna be a lot. I'm like you, it's better having our own place.
Yeah, I mean, nobody wants to deal with rate increases, but if you know one's coming,
Yeah.
then we've got to do the right thing and prepare our customers for it.
I've always, our municipal power line has always had among the lowest rates in the state of Kentucky, and sometimes, some years they've been the lowest, some years they've been right behind Bardstown, but in most cases, they've been the lowest. And I think we ought to shoot for at least trying our best to stay in the top 20% of lowest rates state. And
I expect we'll stay there,
yeah,
even with
I think so
this.
too. I think so too, and I think that would be we need to natural gas, we've got situations with it, for natural gas, and of course, water and sewer and EPA and some stuff like that. There's a lot of challenges ahead with utilities, but I still say we have the best cost of utilities and the best service of utilities of any place in the state of Kentucky. And hope we can continue in that realm, and I think we will be able to. We got good management, we got good, and your board knows who to count on in consulting situations and who not to count on in consulting situations, and it makes a lot of difference. So I appreciate the work of the utility and of all of our utilities, and also our boards and all of our boards. Are there any other final questions or comments?
Glad we're having this meeting.
I know you know it's the best meeting we ever had.
Well,
It's a good meeting.
I'm glad we didn't make a decision to take it out of everybody's hands. We have a chance to serve in this manner, that we can have these types of meetings instead of having no control.
Yeah, we really appreciate our
Yeah.
partnership with the city. There's no question on that. And, you know, Mr. Mayor, you were so kind in your comments, and the commissioner was so kind in your comments, but we also appreciate the commissioners, and I'm gonna, what Mark says, the ability to come together, have this joint meeting, get the information from Brad and his team has just been, outstanding in so many ways, and we appreciate the commission, and just thanks for being here.
Yep.
Final comments? Okay, I will, ask for a motion to adjourn the city commission.
Second.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
On behalf of the Temple Commission, I'd ask for a motion to adjourn our meeting as well.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Tammy, roll call?
Commissioner Howell,
Aye.
Commissioner Curlin,
Aye.
Commissioner Weaver,
Aye.
Commissioner Sights,
Aye.
Chairman Shannon.
Aye.